lecturers and the topics we've had so far. And last April, we had a ninth edition by Professor Christopher Hall. This 10th edition that you have joined, we want to have a webinar discussion on studying and researching early African Christianity in Africa. I want to have an idea of how people are doing it, some of the issues, and what we can all learn together and also equip ourselves for those of us interested in early African Christianity, particularly on the African continent. I will at this point invite my co-moderator, uh, Executive Director of the Center for Early African Christianity in New Haven, Dr. Michael Glerup, to continue from here. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Rudolph. Thank you for being here today, everyone. We're glad you're here. So just as kind of usually when I start out these, I usually kind of introduce some new books that we've published. So we have a new book out. I'm not sure if you can see it. I think it might be backwards, but it's called Why Does Augustine Matter? And it's by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. It's a lecture series that I gave 3 years ago. And so it's a very helpful one. And we continue to publish the We Believe series, Experiencing the Creed Through Ancient African Christianity by Chris Hall. And so the third volume is available, but because our US government is shut down, the Library of Congress is shut down. So I can't get some information before I publish the book, but it will be out in the spring. And then one of my colleagues that just joined us, Joel Lasky, is finishing up a history of early Christian mission um, by Angelo Di Berdino, which we hope to have out by the end of the year. So with that, should I take an opportunity to introduce our three distinguished panelists? So today we have Musa Gaya. He's a professor of church history, Department of Religion and Philosophy, the University of Jos Plateau State, Nigeria. He's been teaching in this university since 1990. He has published several books and articles in reputable journals, local and internationally. His last publication, which he did with Wendy Hellman, is Early Christianity, a textbook for African students that was published in 2019. He is working a similar treatment of history of Christianity in Africa. His interest is in collecting data, oral and written, for the reconstruction of histories and the impact of African appropriation of the Christian message and the life and times of African and European missionaries and church leaders in Nigeria. He's married to Pamela and he has 4 children. Chris Horton holds a master's degree in law and theology, but is continuing to study with a view to embarking on doctoral research. He has 35 years' experience as a general counsel in several multinational businesses and a nonprofit social housing provider. He's also served in local church leadership for many years. He's now focused on leadership training and mentoring in a home church network, All Nations Movement, which is allnationsmovement.org if you'd like to see it. He's married with 3 grown children, 5 grandchildren. He's passionate about family, hill walking, and cross-cultural mission. His first book, Belong, was published in 2024. From way down under, we have Chris DeWitt. He's the Associate Professor of New Testament and Early Christian Studies in the Department of Biblical and Ancient Studies at the University of South Africa, Pretoria. Honorary
That's actually that's actually my old affiliation.
Oh, it
I've
is?
moved since. Yes. I've moved since.
Okay, I thought it was at the Pretoria. So what you want to
I'm
introduce
at,
yourself
I
real
am
quick?
at I am at the University of Pretoria
Pretoria. Okay.
currently, which is different from the University of South Africa, where I am Professor of New Testament and Early Christian Studies and head of the department.
Okay. I apologize about that, Chris. I mean,
No
yes.
problem at all.
So, but your research areas include New Testament, Apocrypha, early Christianity, late antiquity. Um, Is my most recent book Revisiting John Chrysostom, or have you published something since then?
Since then, we've published a book on slavery in late antiquity with Cambridge, and also a book on medicine and disability in early Christianity.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I need to update my web searches. I need to stop using Google and just go straight to Perplexity. That's where all the answers are now. So, well, I'd like to welcome you, and I appreciate all three of you willing to join us today and be a part of this panel discussion. So, Rudolph, would you like to start, or should I continue?
No, you could continue. You have the mic. I'll come in when you want me.
So, we sent a series of questions out to our panelists. They were pretty in-depth in some ways, but I wanted to give Musa the opportunity. Maybe is there a question that you saw on that list that you would like to start with, that you would like to answer?
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the panel. What I want to say very briefly is to take off from what our mentors have done, namely Kwame Bediako, Professor Andrew Walls, and Professor Oden. And that is looking at the relationship between early Christianity in Africa and modern Christianity. I think Bediako was perhaps the first that I've seen that did that. And when he published his doctoral thesis from Aberdeen, where he looks at early Christian theologians and compare them with African theology, particularly the evangelical brand. He tied one of the first conservative evangelical theologian in Africa, Bediako, with Tertullian, and did a good review of the works of all these theologians. So, but the dividing line is argument is that Tertullian and Cato seem to be speaking with the same voice. Forgotten the names of the other one, but I would remember the name. But he seemed to be a little bit on the other side, and which is looking at Africa, looking at backgrounds, religious background, relating Christianity to religious background, non-religious background. I think I like that type of treatment. It then makes the study of early Christianity very relevant to the present discourse. Then I saw the work of Walls, who thinks that Tertullian seemed to be preaching or talking about Pentecostalism, even as early as the 4th century. So for me, that was interesting. Although I would say that the Pentecostalism that would really resonate with Tertullian's work and the Montanist theology, it's perhaps the African churches, the African initiated churches, not the modern Pentecostal. Even though a lot of the teaching of this in the African initiated churches, some of the teachings are derived from the earlier ones, the African initiated churches. So, but one can do such kind of reflection and see that there is relevance in studying the early African Christianity, because it's relevant to what is happening now. I mean, you can do that kind of reflection, go back to the early period and see that Christians wrestle with that. Then Odin also just impressed me by the fact that he made a point which he says that early African theologians worked hard, and they really did put in a lot of work in the theological pronouncements they made. The articulation of theology that they made wasn't, they were really working hard. And that's why they were hard in the then world. And they became pioneers in some fields. A lot of the theology that we use today actually sprang up from their hard work. And that made me to think, well, if we really want to learn from early Christianity, and one of the things we need to learn is diligence, hard work, thinking, good thinking, and so on, so that we can widen the frontiers of theological discussion, and make it and be more creative, so that it's not just a repetition of what others have said, but a thinking that really relates theology to our context, but thoroughly done properly so that it can be understood by theologians globally. It's not something that we can do in our local corners, and think, and it doesn't make sense to somebody in Europe or America or Australia. But we should do it in such a thorough way, using all the tools of theologizing to come up with a theology that is contextual, but yet clearly spelled out with very strong argument. And that's what I got from Odin. That's what the early African Christian theologians did. And so nobody, they could be looked at as if they were saying something that was erroneous, bad, like Tertullian's theology of Pentecostalism, but you can't fault their reasoning. And I thought that to me is good, and makes it very important that African theologians should have a reflection of what has happened in the early period of Christianity and how relevant that is in the theological discussion at the moment. Unfortunately, in the seminaries and universities, in Nigeria in particular, we're following just the footprints of Western theologians. And can do your studies throughout, and all that you know is about what the Westerners have done and so on. And it seems as if we are losing that momentum that began with Sawyer, with Phoebe, with all these great African theologians that began to do the same thing that non-Africans were doing. That to me is not very helpful at all. And I think that's why I think we need to go back to early Christianity and see how these Africans have really wrestled with the questions and the issues that were contemporary to their time. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Chris.
Yeah, I'd like to jump off
I
that.
get to know there are two Chris's. So.
Oh, sorry, Chris Horton. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, apologies to the other Chris. Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that same question, and I really resonate with much of what's been said so far. I mean, the question begins, how did you get into studying early African Christianity? And is there any particular influence from any of those three? And for me, I literally came into African Christianity via the Middle East, almost literally, visiting Egypt as part of a trip involved with some missionaries in the Middle East, and undertaking some research in peacemaking in the Palestinian context, which is the particular focus that I'm on at the moment. The thesis that I've just written is on the Desert Fathers and Mothers and how their spirituality prepared them to be peaceable and to be peacemakers. So that's how I came into recent study of early African Christianity. But really, the story goes back to when I was a teenager, way back in the 1970s, when I was and still am part of the house church movement in the UK, which at the time was quite novel, and we were looking for roots. And as we explored what are the things that really matter to us, we found there are a lot of things in the history of the first few centuries after New Testament times that really resonated. In fact, we rather arrogantly and ambitiously regarded ourselves as a continuation of the New Testament church. And we were rather excited about various things that we thought we found in the history. And personally, I've always been fascinated by history. So in a general sense, that's how I came to it. And I've been dipping into a number of the early African Christians, the Tertullians and Augustines, but the Desert Fathers and many of the others, Cyprian and so on, and finding a lot in them that really resonate with what we're seeking to do in practice in the churches that I'm involved with. And Andrew Wall's writings in particular, I found quite encouraging and inspirational, not just because of his understanding of crossing cultural boundaries, although that's really important, and the church network that I'm part of rejoices in the name of all nations, and we aspire to live up to that name. And certainly in the churches in the West Midlands area of England, where I spent most of the last 3 decades, we have a rich ethnic diversity, and that has really strengthened the churches. It's enabled all of us to think things through from other people's perspectives, and to try and benefit from other cultural assumptions, other worldviews, even within the church. But it's not just his sensitivity, his understanding of crossing cultural boundaries. What I found particularly encouraging was that we can learn from the past, we can learn from Christians who thought and did various things that we might not be comfortable with without being afraid. And coming from a sort of broad evangelical Pentecostal background, I'm conscious that many of the people I'm in church with are actually very uncomfortable with people who do things differently, and with exploring the thinking and the practice of those early Christians. One silly example would be that we encourage people to fast and pray. But then you look at the example of some of the Desert Fathers and wonder whether they really took it too far. That's perhaps a silly example, but it's a very current one at the moment. And so I found Andrew Walls in particular, Thomas Oden as well, but Andrew Walls in particular really encouraged me not to be afraid of benefiting from the spirituality, from the understanding of Christians who are very different. That resonated with me because I remember way back in my undergraduate days, my best friend was actually a Roman Catholic, and we found that we had in common far more than the things that we differed on. And it was a great joy to pray together and work together. And in more recent days, I continue to really benefit from that inspiration. One little word of caution is that I'm very aware of the risks of a sort of pick and mix theology and a pick and mix spirituality, where we just pick what seems attractive and what we like the look of superficially, without actually digging into the reality underneath. So I caution myself on that, but I am encouraged at the way we can learn from people in the past and contemporary fellow believers who do things very differently. One final thought on that is that I say I literally came in from the Middle East. In 2023, I made my first visit into Africa, and that was no further than Egypt. But I particularly wanted to visit one or two of the monasteries in the Wadi Natron area, and was able to visit two, and remember a conversation with one of the monks very distinctly. It was a lovely conversation as he showed us around and explained various things. And the more we talked, the more we realized that we approach scripture in the same sort of way. And we shared how we read scripture devotionally. And I found that here's a brother in Christ with whom I have a lot in common.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let's move to our Chris 2.
No, he's Chris 1. I've quoted him in some of my work.
Okay, they're okay. Well, numero uno in our hearts and minds. Chris, so kind of maybe let us know how you kind of got into this field, and maybe some things that you participate in quite a few international conferences. How does your location kind of actually help you see differently from maybe some European scholars, or if any or not? What does your location contribute? Sorry, I have a phone call.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Excuse me if my voice isn't sounding that great. I'm recovering from a bit of a flu. Well, for those of you who might know my work, I actually do not work on early African Christianity. That's not my specialty. My field is the Greek East, and specifically Syria. So I work on Greek and Syriac authors, although I will be doing some work now in the coming year or two on Cyprian. But I am an African. I was born in Africa. It's the only place that I've ever lived. So the question would be, there's maybe a subtle difference in the framing of our question. On the one hand, we can ask, how do we do early African Christianity? But on the other hand, we can ask, what is distinctive about African scholarship, scholars from Africa, in how we interpret and deconstruct early Christian sources? And I think that's maybe where I try to come in. because something I think in Africa that we are all, if you live in Africa, it is something that we are constantly facing and constantly in dialogue with, is we are at a point where we need to rethink and really deconstruct the dominant epistemologies that underlie our scholarly presumptions. Presumptions about sources, presumptions about methods, and in many ways, presumptions about how history works. Something that I think I can't say this characterizes African scholarship. All I can say is this is what characterizes my scholarship as an African scholar. And that is something that, to quote Michel Foucault, this idea of writing histories of the present. And that is something that I would like to acknowledge my former colleague from UNISA, who is also today in the audience, Professor Gerard van den Heever. Something that we have been working on for quite some time is basically approaching early Christian texts with very real present concerns in mind. And my work initially has been on slavery. So slavery was, I've written a few books on slavery and slavery in early Christianity. And I think as an African scholar, it has helped me to become very suspicious of early Christian sources and early Christian rhetoric, and especially early Christian discourse, where there are very specific operations of power. And I wonder whether African scholars might be more aware of certain power discourses in texts that others might take for granted, because power discourses are often very invisible. So I think when we as African scholars work with early Christian sources, I think what we bring to the table is perhaps a critical awareness of discursivities that have shaped African life and African society in very fundamental ways. And ways of speaking, ways of thinking, epistemologies, in other words, that in some ways might press colonial agendas, and in other ways might press us to think post-colonially, or a buzzword nowadays, of course, is decolonially. And that is, and I think that would be what I can say about doing early Christian studies as an African scholar. So something that we are doing at my department, and one of the visions of the Department of New Testament and Related Literature at the University of Pretoria, we have a faculty of theology and religion. And one of our big challenges is to deconstruct this chasm between New Testament studies, which falls within biblical studies and authoritative scriptural studies, and early Christianity. And a lot of people assume early Christianity and the early church is a product of the New Testament, but it's really not like that. The New Testament is a product of the early church. And when I was appointed when I was in my interview to be appointed as the chair of the Department of New Testament, someone asked me, but someone said, you are not a typical New Testament scholar, because I work on John Chrysostom and all these other authors. And they asked me, why do I want to, how could we justify my position? And then I said, well, in fact, I am the perfect person. Obviously, any candidate would have said that. But I thought I was the right choice because the New Testament is a late antique document. But in Africa, we have our own challenges. And the challenges that I think we need to take very, very seriously in Africa is there is still a lot of religious fundamentalism and biblical foundationalism. And this is something that is a major challenge for us and for my work. And a lot of African students who do work will sort of approach the Bible as if reading a specific New Testament verse in a specific Ghana context, or in a Nigerian context, or in a South African context, will solve certain problems. But that's not how it works. In many ways, we need to start with the African context and then go to the text and ask what the effects could be. So these are random thoughts, Mike and colleagues, about doing early Christian studies in Africa. And perhaps that is something we should distinguish in this discussion: African scholarship on early Christianity and scholarship on early African Christianity. Yeah, I don't know if that in any way is, contributes or makes sense, but that would be my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
No, that totally makes sense, and I appreciate you making those distinctions. I do like to argue that in some ways, John Chrysostom is African. He's been read on the continent for almost 16 centuries, and it is very important to the Ethiopian church. Much of his writings, in some of his writings, I think, survive in Ethiopic versus other readings. So I appreciate you making that distinction, and I do think they're both important, and I think those were really important issues that you brought up for us. So thank you, thank you. Rudolph, do you have any questions that you would like to share with the group, or?
Yeah, well, I wanted to open it up that whilst we are at it, we can invite our audience or participants if they have any questions following the earlier submission. And then, but Mike, I wanted to post the question areas. Share if this helps to guide our discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So any questions from what we've heard so far before we go further to some of the pre-questions we did send to our panelists?
So I mean, how have you, as researching in this field, source accessibility? Are sources becoming more accessible than they were before, or are they still fairly difficult? I actually came up on a website the other day that actually was listing all these Libyan inscriptions. So and it was a group out of the UK, which 5 years ago, even 5 years ago, they weren't available. So it seems to be some projects that are just making this information more available to everybody around the world. But at the same time, you still have to have internet access. You still have to find them and know about them. So any source accessibility, collaborative opportunities that you've seen?
Yeah, I might be able to come in here to say that there are certainly challenges with this. And many of these challenges are economic challenges, because many of the sources, of course, that we use are books, critical editions in books. Even inscriptions. In many ways, you have to access these through various online platforms, electronic platforms. And these come at a very high cost. Critical texts are extremely expensive. I mean, books with European publishers like Brill or now De Gruyter, Moer Siebeck, and in general, monographs are for people living in Africa. These are extremely expensive to us, and these databases for texts and for inscriptions and for papyri, for many people are still excluded and many young African scholars are still excluded from using these for several reasons. And I speak for the South African context, because many universities simply, it's difficult to justify the cost of purchasing or subscribing to these databases because they are just very expensive. The TLG, for example, I am fortunate at my university we have the TLG, but it took some convincing for them to actually subscribe to it. So, and then on the other hand, there are also challenges with regards to expertise in working with these texts. I mean, working with inscriptions, working with material remains, and working with texts. In many, in South Africa, many of our students can't read Greek. They certainly can't read Latin anymore. Because other skills and other subjects and other disciplines are prioritized. So on the one hand, we are fortunate in that we might have a critical theoretical robustness in Africa that is growing, and many of my students are very adept at using decolonial perspectives, post-coloniality, feminist critique, African feminist critiques. And so we have the methodological capabilities, but then, and they are very strong with methodology and critical theory, but then they cannot read Latin. They can only read Latin in a very basic way. And then not only do they not have the knowledge and the skills to read these ancient texts, but they also do not have the knowledge and skills to work with papyri, to work with manuscripts, to work with inscriptions. So there are economic challenges, but there are also, I want to say, challenges in the way we do tertiary education and what subjects and disciplines are prioritized and what are not. I only speak for the South African context. I would be very interested to hear from Rudolf and Musa, perhaps, what the status of the ancient languages like Greek, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, what the status of these languages are at your universities. I would be interested to hear, because we are really struggling.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a fair concern. Here at our institute, at Kofi Christola, we don't do languages in the sense of the classical languages. We have for Bible translation students, we assume you have a first degree training in Greek or Hebrew, and then you do some advanced reading whilst you are here. But if you don't have prior knowledge to those languages, you will not be able to enter into that track. But because we also focus more on African Christianity generally, we treat subjects in the early African Christianity more with the English translation, even though we have indeed recognized the need to be thinking about these languages, Syriac, Coptic, Latin, Greek, but it's still something yet to be developed from my end. I don't know what Prof. Guya Musa has your university like in this dimension of language.
Okay, we do, like you have said, we actually do Greek and Hebrew. But with respect to early Christianity, particularly in North Africa, and perhaps its influence in the West African sub-region, what is really needed is perhaps not this other Eastern, Middle Eastern languages, but particularly what we need here is Arabic. Many of our sources of some interaction between Christians and Muslims, or Christian presence in pre-Islamic period, have been constructed and written in Arabic. From the research that was done in the early period in the 17th, 18th, 19th and century, 18th and 19th century. But we have a problem. I think it's all over the country. That is that Arabic is seen as the language of Islam rather than the language of scholarship. Some universities, if not many of them, would not even allow someone who is not a Muslim to read or study Arabic. Like in my university, we've never had any Christian studying Arabic to be able to read a lot of the manuscripts in Sokoto, in Kano, and some of them are in the archives in Kaduna that are written in Arabic, dating back to 15th, 16th century, the account of travelers, Arab travelers and so on. The other language that perhaps we may also need, particularly in West Africa, is German. Not very popular. I'm not sure of any university where you can take a degree in Germany unless you went to Germany. A lot of the early visitors, European visitors to Africa in the 16th century were Germans. And then it went on and so on. A lot of the materials, like the writings of Barth and so on, were all in Germany and German. So you have to, if you have to access them, you have to maybe go to library in Germany. But I'm sure the manuscripts are there. So we rely on the study of Hebrew and Greek to understand and do exegesis in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And that's perhaps all. The idea of also doing studies in Syriac, in Aramaic, which is very close to Hebrew, and even Armenian and so on languages are not really very, we don't have the competence and we don't have the materials here. So even if you want to do it, you have to go outside where you can get it. But then when you come back here, you will have problems teaching students some of these languages. Like if I interact with the lecturers in the languages, they have real problem in teaching students to learn Hebrew and to read the Bible in Hebrew. Of course, the same with Greek. And that is because of the background. Their background in English is poor, so coming to another language that has rules that are different from English becomes to be more difficult and maybe even confusing. So in terms of biblical studies, we're still very low and really struggling with even the Hebrew and the Greek. And even to think of adding other languages, which are biblical languages, would be almost difficult, if not impossible. But for historians, I think German and Arabic is helpful because of the many Arabic manuscripts we have in the north, and some of the universities but we have no access to them because we can't read Arabic. A lot of the history of Africa that is written before Europeans were written by Arabs, written in Arabic, and then in German. So that is a big problem. What we're doing at the University of Jos, if we will succeed, is to move Arabic to languages in such a way that anybody can come from any department who is interested in learning Arabic for research, for scholarship, can learn Arabic to whatever level. And that may be helpful rather than limiting Arabic only to the study of Islam. So that's what we're wrestling with. There'll be a lot of resistance because I'm not sure, I don't know of any university in Nigeria that has Arabic in languages, in modern languages, which is the right thing because Arabic is it's a modern language, it's an international language, and therefore should be studied by anybody. But some universities are so conservative, particularly in the north here, that Arabic is not studied as a language that can be used for scholarship in all fields, except if you are doing it, learning it to learn Arabic or Islam, which I think is not helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should just add that it's not much better in the UK. There is a smaller and smaller number of institutions that are engaging in theological studies, biblical studies, and declining numbers enrolling. And I would say most of us, I include myself, know enough Greek and so on and Latin to be dangerous. We think we might understand. I'd love to read John Chrysostom and understand the nuances, but I know I'd be dangerous without a lot of specialist help.
Yeah. Mike, there's one colleague who for a long time was in the US, but since relocated to Ghana, Dr. Isiedu. I'm pulling him out, but if he can hear me and he's able to respond, what his experiences has been so far, having come from the US, now in Ghana, continue with his research. Of course, he has been an expert on Augustine or interest in Augustine for a while. Dr. Sidu, I hope I'm not pulling you from somewhere. You are muted, by the way. Otherwise, we can go on. Yeah. Okay. I think Mike, we can go. Maybe he will respond if it's possible for him. But the issue of language. So I mean, Chris, one, if you said do it, what will be some of your ideas concerning how we encourage what I would call maybe the original languages, if I'm to put it that way, for Africans in Africa, African scholars in Africa in early Christianity.
Yeah, well, something we are doing at my university in our faculty is, I think, Rudolph, one of the problems that our students have is accessibility. I think, and the interesting thing, I think as Africans, we are very skilled with languages, because I'm sure most of the Africans here in this panel, I don't know about you, but almost all people in South Africa are bilingual, or most of them are in fact multilingual. I mean, I speak several languages. English is not my first language. So we have, I think in that sense, we certainly have the language skills, the skills to learn these languages. And many of my students who have gone further in Greek or Latin, they actually do very, very well. It's just very few of them. But so it's not a question, I think, of whether it's capability. I think it's accessibility, because we do have economic challenges. Many of our students, after they've studied their degrees, they need to get a job. They need to start working. They need to start making money. These are realities. And I think it's realities everywhere. I don't think this is only an African reality. It is global realities. So I think the answer would be to make it more accessible. So what we are doing is we have affordable, because it's also an economic thing. We have affordable online courses for Greek and Hebrew, which we are currently developing. And then what my next project is to actually develop Coptic and Syriac as two languages in our department, where students can actually take these languages. You're not going to have hundreds of students who do these languages, but you will have, if you have a handful, just so that we can also develop experts. Because the problem is, if you are working with these texts, if you are working with early African Christianity and you do not know Latin, you will never get into depth in the sources. You will always just skim the surface. So we have the capability, because we are multilingual, and I think something wonderful can happen because we have critical, theoretical, and philosophical robustness. It's built into our blood because these are life and death things. These are things that touch our bodies in many ways. If we can take that and we can bring expertise in using sources in the ancient languages, if we can bring these two things together, I think we will have very, very strong scholarship. And it is my vision to make our department one of the centers of studying early Christianity, but especially the languages of early Christianity. And I agree with Professor Gaia about Arabic. Arabic is just something that is in a different department from ours, but to cultivate studies in classical Arabic is crucial for understanding early African Christianity.
Yeah, I think Joel wants to come. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I want to second the discussion about languages. Being a Lutheran, Luther said, "You lose the languages, you lose the theology." But there's also the fact of what you said, Chris, about being able to get into the world of the ancients. You have to know the languages to do that. Yeah. So, but I also had a question, Chris DeWitt, about your approach. I mean, I'm dean of the graduate school here, and I've always had students start with the text and then see what how it might apply to your situation, especially for our African students. That's the standard approach. So to hear you kind of reverse that, I think is interesting. And I kind of like it in the sense because I do have students who come from a Pentecostal background and are looking to speak to that from the African context, but I always have them start with a text. So the concern I have is that then you start reading things into the text that might not be there. So I'm hoping maybe you can. We probably don't have time for that today, but I'm very interested in this approach.
I can't hear anymore. Is it just me?
Yeah, I think that bit of a break in his connection. But I think, Joel, are you okay? Can he respond?
Yeah, I was hoping, yeah, I've got a bad connection here. Sorry about that. But I was basically looking for Chris DeWitt to talk a bit about that moving from the African context to the text as opposed to the other way around, if he had a specific example.
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, I think that's an excellent question, and I don't know if I have an answer for that. I don't think it necessarily needs to be one or the other. My experience with supervising masters and PhD students is a lot of my students. I too come from a Pentecostal background, by the way. although I see myself today as being post-Pentecostal, but I'm involved in the Pentecostal church because this, that's just my background. But um, a lot of our students have a vested interest in the text, in the text itself. The text to them is important because it is what they hear in church. The text has intrinsic value, and a lot of our students feel if we just take this text and apply it to a certain problem in an African context, then that might ameliorate the problem. But I think we all know that that's not how it works, and it never works like that. Simply reading, the story of John 4 and the Samaritan woman is not going to, solve problems about gender-based violence for instance, in the informal settlement, which is just about 10 kilometers away from my house. So that's why my view is to actually say, let's begin with the problem. And I actually had a class today with my third years, and we were discussing the household codes of Ephesians and Colossians, and we ventured into the Didache and some of the early Christian literature. And it was wonderful. That's one of the presentations that two of the young black ladies did, is they actually started with gender-based violence, because gender-based violence is a big problem in South Africa. And they approach the household codes from that perspective of gender-based violence. And these are third years, so it's not the most sophisticated analysis, but it was really wonderful to see what they actually did. And suddenly they had a bit of a different take on the text. And suddenly it was not something that they had to follow verbatim as sort of the voice or the word of God, but it became something that they could negotiate with and engage with. And they started looking into the Greek, they started looking at words. What does the word, and they don't have advanced knowledge of Greek, these students, but they were curious to ask, well, what is the Greek word for submit? And I was able to help them. And so that's sort of a good, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's sort of the day-to-day practice that we have. That we have here. As I say, one of my biggest challenges with my students, and to give you an idea, last semester I taught the first years, and my first year New Testament class has 200 students. I have 200 students at the University of Pretoria in my first year New Testament class. We are over-enrolled for theology at my university. We have too many students. We actually show some students away because we only have certain amount of spaces for them. So I have 200 students in my first year class, but the majority it's massive. It is massive. It is an intimidating class. And I can tell you that more than 90% of those students are black, but we also have some white students, and we are all Africans. So that is sort of, it's a lot of things that I am still trying to make sense of for myself. But I don't know if that answers the question. That is a great question. Thank you.
That's helpful, and the fact that you brought up hippotasso, I mean, how that's understood in cultures is just as important here, frankly. And we have to tell people it doesn't mean dominance. Submission means, like Christ did it. So, very true. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I was interested in the Pentecostal balance with your 200 students in class, but yeah. Thank you.
So
Michael,
I just wanted to add something onto this. I do think one of the things that we're exploring at our center is developing tutors on different subjects, and one of them could be language through using AI. So there's some new ways of building on some APIs on these large language models in which we can actually teach these ancient languages. Not perfectly, but we can get to people that are curious, have talent, and are able to pursue this on their own. And then maybe creating some other kind of WhatsApp groups in which can help reinforce this learning. But I do think we have some technology advances that have just been made in the last couple of years that can really help with languages. I know here at Yale, we teach African languages, but we don't have enough enrollment, so we actually have to do shared classes with other Ivy League universities. But I think there's a model here that we can learn languages with tutors and AI. So I think in the future, I, you might hear us kind of pushing this. I know we're actually going to probably make a Tom Oden tutor that you can ask Tom Oden a question about his systematic theology or something like that. You know, just
Yeah.
and it could be just theological questions, but it'd be based on. So we do all the training data on Tom's systematic theology or something like that. So again, it's
Yeah.
about controlling the data. And so but then how do you make it useful to people that, even now, I think there's a lot of people that are going to these LLMs before they're going anywhere else to do research. So
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I'm just wondering with our category of questions whether we've made some comprehensive. We've touched almost every side of it. But as I wanted to, we've had one of our previous Walls-Oden Bediako lecture, Faraj, Faraji. Prof. Salim, you have any comments so far? And of course, David Eastman is also around, so it'll be good to hear from them, their own experience with language. I think language has become one of the key dimensions so far. Yeah. I hope it didn't wake you up early.
No, greetings to everyone. I'm just enjoying the conversation and just reflecting on what everyone um, is saying. From Professor Gaia in Nigeria, Dr. DeWitt in South Africa, and just thinking about the challenges for for studying languages and having accessibility. So um, yeah, I think the issue of raising Arabic, that's very important. Arabic is definitely a modern language and an international language, especially during the medieval period. And we know the transmission of even Arabic sources into Latin between the 8th and 12th, 13th centuries thereabout um, is also important. I mean, even Aristotle's engagement of not Aristotle, I'm sorry, Thomas Aquinas' engagement of Aristotle was based on sources that had been transmitted from Arabic um, into Latin. So that's important. And the comment that I made is the Coptic Arabic continuum as well. The number of Coptic texts and Coptic sources that were translated into Arabic and dispersed all throughout the Sahel and certainly West Africa is also very important, especially during the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries and so forth. And so I know Dr. Gacy, we talked about, I think I mentioned Father Vantini is Oriental, I'm paraphrasing the title, Oriental Sources of Nubia, something to that degree. It's a compilation of, I don't know, 100 or more Arabic sources that have all been translated into English. It's a database, which is very useful as well. It talks a lot about also the history of the Nile Valley, Central, and even West Africa, and so forth, which provides, of course, the historical cultural context for the emergence of Christian communities and its dispersion and spread and so forth. So, um, but yeah, I mean the inhibitive cost though of these critical additions, as you know, someone mentioned earlier, um, yeah, it's a big deal. So I think um, online databases, um, these AI tutors, I'm like, wow. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I know that's already where we're going and so forth. Um, but I think as many online databases, uh, which has a lot of this stuff in terms of papyrological sources, epigraphic sources. There's a lot of stuff out there online that, in terms of for accessibility, and I mean that's open, not just online that would cost. There's some open online sources. The Vantini source is free. It's open. And then there's also an Occidental one as well, where Latin sources have been translated into English. Now, of course, I know the ideal is to study the languages, and that should be emphasized. But I also just think that familiarity with the text themselves is also a big deal. Being able to just access the sources in translation is an intermediate step, I should say, to studying in the languages and so forth. Um, so it just made me say I need to brush up, because I studied Coptic in grad school, and I'm a member of a Coptic um, society and community here in Southern California. I'm in Los Angeles, in the United States. So it just made me say, well, I need to brush up on my Coptic, um, so I could,
And be a
be
tutor at some
be able to
point.
teach. Yes, yes.
Well, and as you were talking too, I think part of what we're trying to foster here too is a series of collaboration with African and Western scholars. I do have access to all these databases, in which I can, on specific requests, probably can help out with these texts for certain research opportunities. And I've done that for other scholars. It's not something I could put online, but it's definitely something I can collaborate. If someone asks, say, I can't find this text, is there a possibility that you could help me? And so I think there's ways that we should kind of informally it's available, but we probably maybe, as part of our networking and our kind of coming together is sharing these resources that we do have in ways that can benefit scholars on the continent.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Maybe you could put your website on the chat, where how people can contact you as well. Uh,
All right.
yeah, I mentioned Eastman. You have anything to add so far, Dave?
Um, I guess I want to just bring up something that Chris DeVette and I have discussed, and Mike as well, is that what I want long term and where I think Christianity is going is I want to be part of the process somehow where 100 years from now, people from my part of the world are coming to Africa to learn these things. Like that's part of what I want is how could we resource African scholars to raise them up, and that's been talked about in different ways, and that's a very strong motivating factor for whatever I can add, whether it's languages or through training or whatever. I really, really want. Yes, thank you, Joshua. Why wait 100 years? You're correct. Um, but the fact is, there are still so many structural and economic systems that keep northern universities in positions to go back to Chris's, to keep positions in positions of power with access to resources, and how could this collaboration lead not only to individual scholars, yes, but with a larger project of of populating the world with African scholars in these fields. Um, that to me is a very exciting vision of the future that in some small part that's why I'm here is how can I be part of that? Not to replicate people who do what I do where I do it. I'm not against that, but and that's dying. I mean that is itself is dying. Biblical studies is dying in universities here slowly, but it's happening. When Chris DeVette told me he had 200 students in his New Testament class, that used to happen in American universities, hardly anymore. So it is dying here as well. But the long-term vision. In fact, when Chris DeVette and I were talking last week, he said, I'm at the point in my life that I'm beginning to think about what I'm going to leave behind. And that's that really connected with me because that's a question that I'm asking myself as well. What can we be part of through the center or through collaborations with our colleagues? What can we leave behind? That's going to far outlast our lives. So that's a motivating factor that I hear behind all these things for me, and I think many of us share that. And I don't know how we get there, but I'm on board for whatever ideas we have.
Yeah. Well, a good start is a conversation. So hopefully, the good Lord will lead us. Um, yeah. Okay. So, Michael, any further? Um, I think so far I feel we need to have another conversation, maybe on this platform or somewhere else. But yeah, Mike.
Yeah, no, I think this is good. I think this is a good place to close off. We kind of I think I'm trying to make these questions available to people. I do think there might be a reason
Yeah.
for having certain scholars reflect on these issues and maybe start publishing them so that we can think together on how to move forward
Mm,
studying
mm,
early
mm,
African Christianity or just studying Christianity on the continent of Africa. So that's part of there is a continuum there that we should
yeah.
recognize. And I specifically want to study John Chrysostom in Africa. I think that would be
You've got an invitation to come to the University of Pretoria, Mike.
okay.
It's an open invitation, and bring Eastman with you, please.
I'll just carry him in my suitcase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But can
Okay.
I
And
just say
I,
something?
Yeah.
May
yeah,
I
go
say
ahead,
something?
please.
I think I shouldn't speak on behalf of my African colleagues, but what I should say, I can only speak for myself here, but I think they would agree with me. I think we sincerely appreciate forums like this that bring African scholars into conversation, because I don't know if this is a challenge that my colleagues face, but sometimes we do face some biases when Western scholars hear you are from Africa. It is, I must say, I don't experience it that much anymore, and I'm very grateful for that. But sometimes it is very difficult to, scholarship is very territorial, it's very cliquey.
Political.
And you sort of, you can have the best ideas and the best skills and the best scholarship, but if you're not part of a group, part of a community, part of a network, it's very difficult. And I want to just say to Mike, thank you for this. We really appreciate it. It is a way of giving voice, because that is something that Africa has lost over many decades, that we are fighting to regain. Is just a voice, because Africa has been voiceless in many contexts, and to have our voice heard and to be accepted and to be respected as peers. It is something we do not take for granted. And I think from my side, I don't speak for anyone else, but from my side, I just want to say thank you, and I hope the conversation can continue.
Yeah.
Appreciate
And I think maybe intra conversation. So, and I'm sure many in West Africa perhaps are hearing you for the first time, Chris. So how do we foster South, North, East, West conversation? On a platform like this, we don't need to travel in person for now, but at least occasional online conversations as this can also go a long way to foster the network, the intra-African network, whilst we collaborate as well with our colleagues across the Atlantic and elsewhere. I mean, we'll be happy to hear colleagues also from Asia along the line. But yeah, all right. I think yes, we've exhausted our time for the discussion, but maybe host prerogative. If there's any one last comment, we can take that. Otherwise, we can run up. And Mike, I was going to give you the chance to give your closing remarks. So get ready for that. Then I'll come with any
okay.
announcement.
I'm sure they'll be very profound.
Okay. So if there is no question or comment, then maybe we can have the closing remarks.
Let me just say this.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Bishop
I
Jonas
think
and Prof.
one thing, a theme that has been left off with the passing of early historians is actually the influence of Nubian Christianity in sub-Saharan in West African sub-region. And one of the areas where this was perhaps traced was in northern Nigeria, part of Chad, and Cameroon. I think it's just not what happened up in the north, but also how that also affected African communities in this part of West Africa. I think we all know that there has been a debate as to the origin of the Hausa ethnicity, which is traced to Christian or a Christian. So these are issues that perhaps we need to also explore, which is quite interesting. The debate was left off somewhere, but it's still not has not been carried on. Perhaps those who began it are not here now, and I think it's something that younger ones can pick up to really go on to look at the materials. It's very, very important. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you too. Bishop Jonas, lastly.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
I just listening with the conversation. I was quite intrigued just because recently I was reading about our institute, and also it came across that it appears that African scholarship, especially theological scholarship, was kind of behind in terms of engagement with the global academic dialogue. And so I was wondering in my mind whether African scholarship need to be authenticated by listening to other scholars in global space. But listening to the conversation now, it makes sense why the dialogue, the international dialogue is very important. And therefore, I pray that God will help us to continue to have that kind of dialogue. Because as a missionary, you go to places and you realize that because of the resource from so-called advanced countries, they are able to reach out the mission fields enormously, whereas it's always seems as if the African scholarship is in preparation. So I think this is a very healthy project, which God grant us all the grace so that our little part of it will eventually achieve what the vision of the discussion is. So thank you very much, Dr. Gazy, and your colleagues for coordinating this very important meeting, which personally it has answered an unanswered question. So thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you too. And yeah, Mike.
Yes. So kind of as we move forward, I do think we should begin establishing more formal networks of like a society for international society for African scholars on early Christianity, some networks, things like that. I think that would be really helpful, and we can help foster that. We have contexts in the Society of Biblical Literature. We have different patristic societies that we can help foster those relationships. So I think there's some formal things we can do. There's informal things to do. But I think for me, I'm just really motivated by the fact that scholarship is diminished without African voices.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to really kind of build our work on, is that we're actually, as a scholarly community in the West, we are diminished without having African voices in this conversation. And that means we're going to have to make sacrifices in some ways to make that happen, not only for resources, but also availability. We do panels. We did a panel last year at Oxford, probably the first all-African panel ever in the history of the 70-year history of the Oxford Studies in Patristics. So there's just ways that we've got to make this happen. So that's kind of one of my goals. And so just know that's kind of how I think about these subjects, is that and I don't want to sound like that's a very Eurocentric way, that you're supposed to enhance our scholarship by being a part of this. But no, it's just the nature of scholarship is diminished without your voices in it. So we appreciate that, and know that we want you to be involved, and we're looking for ways to make that happen within our connections. So thank you for participating. I want to thank the panelists. I think we should give them a little clap. Appreciation. And so we look forward to we'll have our next meeting of the Oden, or the Walls. I always put Oden first. That's just my bias. Rudolph always puts Walls first. Maybe someday we'll have Bediako first. I don't know, but he's the Walls-Oden Bediako lecture series. So we'll have the next one coming in April.
Should be sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
Thank
the
you,
window
Julian.
speaking.
So I appreciate it, and thank you for participation. So this will be on our YouTube station. So if you want to send people to it later, or if you want to refer back to it, it'll be on our CAC 2010 YouTube station.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and Mike, you did put your email address on the chat as well. So anyone who would like to contact. Well, thank you all again. I think you've done the vote of thanks. So, and the announcement, I think, is in order. So that will be all from me then. We wanted a male participant to pray as we close.